Hey there, this is me, Malorian, and this video here is going to be, sure, we'll call it an Orc Tactical Team and everything about Magnus2. Now, in this video, we're going to be talking about everything that Magnus2 does. With that, then, we'll point out what are some of the tricks and tips that you can try and do with Magnus2, and then once you know that, we're going to be explaining how you defeat Magnus2. And then finally, summing it all up, talking about why the statement, only bad players lose to Magnus2. So let's start with what he actually does and what he actually is. So Magnus the Warlord, or Magnus2, is a mercenaries warcaster. Man, I'm wrong already. Speed 5, so a little bit on the slow side. Strength 6, Mat 7, Rat 6. Defense 14 and armor 17. So again, for that curve where normally defense plus armor equals 30, a little bit on the high side, and it's about to get a little bit higher. And then also command 9. Focus 6, so average. And then he has 3 weapons. First of all, he has a scatter gun, which is spray 8, rate of fire 1, so normal, and then POW 12. Nothing really too exciting, but again, you can use it to spray up some infantry if you need to. Sure, why not? Now he also has 2 combat weapons. He has his Foe Cleaver X, which I love, which is a range 1, POW 7, whatever, but it's P plus S 13. Now the big thing about this is like, okay, it's a 13, hooray. Well, 2 things. One, it's armor piercing on a star attack, so that could really catch some things off guard. Again, like if you're going up against like an armor 18 thing, that drops it down to 9, and then you're at dice plus 5. Yeah, that's okay. The other thing, it also has powerful attack. So for one focus, you're already boosting the to hit and the to damage. Now, that rule I find is sometimes not really mattering, because a lot of times you're charging when you're doing this, so you would have got the extra damage anyway, but hey, why not? Another thing to remember with that is that because of the star attack, you can only do it once. Now, he also has a mechanical arm. Now, this one's only a 0.5 range, just a tiny little T-Rex arm, and it's only P plus S 11. Now, the fancy thing about this is that it also has knockdown. So, this one here is usually a little bit more situational, because if you have this better weapon that's longer range, that can be doing a star attack armor pierce, it's not very often that you're going to be going for the knockdown, but hey, sometimes you're up against something with, I don't know, something that's going to enliven away, or who knows what, you know. So if you have to really knock something down to really enable something else, sure, you have a knockdown weapon there ready if you really need it. So the rules that we have on him is one that first of all doesn't normally come up, and that's Backstab. So that's when completely in the back arc you get an additional dice to hit and for damage. So sometimes it comes up, not very often. I don't think in Mark III it's ever come up for me, but it's on the card, and I suppose sometimes it's worth taking a free strike to walk behind and then go for that armor pierce attack. Sure. Also has Field Marshal Unyielding. This is a big one. So, you know, for what unyielding is that if you're ever being dealt a combat attack, so now remember in Mark III, it doesn't matter if you're knocked down or anything like that, you get plus 2 armor. So this is where I said those defensive stats were actually going to be going even higher, because in combat then, all of a sudden he's going from a 14-17 to a 14-19. A little bit more respectable, a lot more respectable. And again, this is a field marshal, so this is going out to the entire battle group. So all of your jacks, whenever it comes to combat time, just have that much more armor, which is a pretty big deal if you have a lot of jacks. Otherwise, that's it for the special rules, but that's probably enough. So let's go on to the spells. First one is Bullet Dodger. So that's a cost 2, range 6, upkeep, and what it gives is a friendly faction model gets plus 2 defense, just straight up, and also dodge. So this can be great for a number of different uses. It can be on Magnus himself, and then all of a sudden he's a 16-17 going to a 16-19 in combat, and then of course with dodge, if you ever missed in combat, you get a free 2-inch movement where you don't get to actually get any free strikes or anything like that. So if they miss you once, you're out of dodge, you're out there and you're safe. Now, usually Magnus is going to have a different spell on him, so it's not normally actually on him unless you're needing to be very defensive. I find this is normally a lot better on some sort of solo you might have. If you'd imagine a Defense 18 Iris that you might have out there, or maybe something else. This is also very good to have on contesting models because they might charge in to try and kill it. First of all, they might miss because of the higher defense, and then secondly, if they do miss, now it moves 2 inches and they might not even get hit. You might even put this on a jack. You know, mercenary jacks usually have lower defense, so it's not really bringing this up to ridiculous levels. You know, if you had Bullet Dodger and Haley 3, that'd be a lot bigger deal. But here, you know, sometimes defense 13 jacks get missed, and if they do, back away, and now you're really in a lot of trouble. So, you know, it has some uses. Usually it's a little bit of a buff for some solo. Next spell, he has Calamity. This one is a cost 3, range 10, upkeep, offensive one you're doing to your opponents, and it's going to be target model unit, suffers -2 defense and armor. Oddly enough, I find I don't cast this that much. A lot of times I'm needing to allocate a lot of my focus, either doing upkeeps or making sure my jacks do what they need to do. But when you got one unit or one jack, you just have to really make sure that you have that you're going to be hitting with all these attacks, because it's going to higher side for defense or higher side for armor. Sometimes this comes up. So again, you know, a nice one to have on the card. Alright, now for the one that's probably the biggest waste on the card, which is Convection. A cost 2, range 10, POW 12 offensive spell where if it destroys a living enemy model, you can give 1 focus to a warjack in your battle group that's in your control. Again, I just going to mention about how he's focus trapped, and if you really need to shoot something down, probably just use your spray. But hey, I'm sure there's some point where this would be a great thing to do, and I've never cast it ever. So next one is Escort, and this is going to be a cost 2 self control for its range, and it's an upkeep. And what this does is warjacks in the spellcaster's battle group beginning their activations in its control range gain +2 movement, and as well the spellcaster gains +2 armor if one or more of the warjacks in his battle group are within 3 inches of it. This is one that's a really big deal for Magnus2, and one you're going to be seeing cast all the time. So not only are your jacks going to be having +2 armor in combat, they're also 2 faster. So that's a really big deal. And as well, again, there's that extra armor for Magnus, which is against everything. So as long as you cast this, then he's going to be a 14-19, and if something actually comes to punch you, you're a 14-21. So you're really now pushing that armor skew to where you might have a higher armor than all of your opponent's jacks, and that's a pretty nice thing to have, especially when you might have focus as well to reduce any damage as well on top of that. So very, very beefy, very, very important for enabling the army, and as well keeping your caster alive. Next one, Obliteration. It's a cost 4, range 10, AoE 5, POW 15. This is where you're destroying the earth itself. And this one here is just a straight up, just big, huge, expensive nuke. Again, we talked about how normally Magnus doesn't have a lot of focus, but sometimes it's the right thing to do. Sometimes there's just some infantry that has high defense, stealth, whatever, and you just want to drift a powerful AoE on it. Sure, or maybe you don't have any jacks left. You just really need to do this big POW 15 to finish off whatever's over there. Sure, again, I can't remember last time I cast this in Mark 3, but it's on the card, and if you ever need it, it's there and ready for you. So, the next thing we're going to talk about is his feat, and it's called Killbox, and that's probably the #1 reason you're going to be playing Magnus2, because it's one of the last remaining control feats in Mark 3. So what it is choose 2 table edges. Enemy models beginning in advance in Magnus's control range cannot advance between those 2 table edges for 1 round. And there's a lot you can do with that. Usually the most important thing you're saying is you can't come back towards me. So what that's really doing is really setting up the alpha. You can run up your force, maybe already charge in and do some initial damage, and then you're saying for everything else, you can't come back to me, you can't attack me, and that can be extremely powerful for when you're doing that peace trade. As well, because you get another direction, you can be saying, and you can't go that way, or you can't go that way, meaning that if most of the force is on one flank, you're making sure it can't come and actually hit you. You can also be doing funky things where you're saying, okay, you can't go back and you can't go forwards, and now things can only go left and right exactly. There's no like, okay, I'm going to end up like, and then I'm going to just be here. No. At no point during that movement can you go forward or backwards, and that can extremely limit the way you're going to be moving. So if you need to trap some model, if you're trying to get to the Warcaster, if you're trying to get to whatever, you can be doing that. Hell, you might be saying to your thing, you can't go back, and you can't be going whatever other direction, and all of a sudden your spellcaster finds itself stuck against a house going like, oh, I can't run away now. I can only go towards all these angry jacks coming towards me. So very, very powerful for setting up that attrition side of the game, for that assassination side of the game, if you catch your opponent in that type of situation. And then finally, huge for a scenario, huge. Because if you just imagine that you have a game that has a scenario, say like every game you're playing in a steamroller, and now you're saying all those things there, they can't come into the zone. They can't come up here to contest this flag. They have to stay right there. Well, if your opponent's not prepared for that, you're going to score again, probably going to score again, and then you win. So it can really set up these auto wins in scenario, which is a very, very big deal. So that's everything he does. Let's take a second, and then we're going to talk about some more of the tricks he has as well. So some of the tricks I've been explaining as I went through all the different rules, but there's a few more other things you probably want to be considering as you're going through this. And I think the first thing you want to be thinking about is what type of Magnus2 build you want to be going with. Because I have a lot of people that ask me, oh, what's the current Magnus2 build? What's the way to play him? And I think the big thing to remember with Magnus2 is that you can play him in almost any way you want. A big way that I define him is kind of like the Denny 1 that used to be of like Mark II for mercenaries, meaning you can polish any turd you want, because you know what any model likes? Impunity. Any model in the game likes to be able to do what it wants to do and have the enemy not be able to do anything back. So what type of lists have I run with Magnus2? You can take a bunch of combat infantry, and it can be running up to either be going for attrition and smashing, just to jam, to keep things out of zones, or both. You can also be taking a bunch of infantry, that's a bunch of guns. And you can be saying, all right, I'm going to be taking all of these, whatever guns you want. I'm going to shoot. Oh no, is the opponent about to get to us? Stop, you're not going to move anymore. Continue shooting. And it's only the next turn that really sucks because they're all over you. But either way, it really, really helps your gun line. And then you can see the same thing with your jacks. With your jacks, you have all these ones where it's like, okay, I could take all these combat jacks, they're going to run up and they're going to smash all these things, they have higher armor, and you can also be doing that with shooty jacks as well. If you want to be going for some sort of like, I've got a whole bunch of mules or mariners, and I'm going to shoot, okay, same thing as before. Are you about to close the gap? Let's lock you down, and now I have the choice of either charging in and doing threshers or whatever I want, and then just continue this attrition. So just, or of course you have your mixed lists as well. So really, you can take whatever you want with Magnus2, knowing that you can just lock everything down for that turn, and be that if you're doing it for that scenario push, if you're doing it to set up that alpha, if you're using it to set up that assassination, all those things are really great. You can basically take whatever you want with Magnus as well. Now, another piece to be considering that you don't always see is the Renegade. A Renegade is a light war jack that is Magnus specific. You can only take this jack with Magnus casters. Now, it has probably only two things that really matters about it. One, it's an arc node. And in mercenaries, that's amazing because we don't really have a lot of arc nodes in mercenaries. Now, Magnus2 is not really like a huge super spell caster or anything like that, but what that would allow you to do is really apply that calamity wherever you need it. So again, I said that that one can be more situational, but then again, if you're playing some sort of force that is more focused on infantry, Magnus 2 is not going to have as many jacks to be allocating out focus to. Well, what that allows him to do is start using some of those other spells, and maybe he can actually start doing some of these calamities and actually getting it out where he needs it. The other big thing that the Renegade has is a once per game shot. That's right, he can only use it once per game, and it's a nice big AoE, it's really nice long range, really high pow. All those don't really matter because what it does is knocks down. And so all of a sudden, if you have this arc node that also has this once per super knockdown shot that it can do, that can be huge, because that can be game winning, where you move up to something, you boost your shot either on your target or something by it, you knock it down. If it's close enough, you can put on Calamity, and it's alright, everybody shoot that thing right there, because now you're going to be hitting basically automatically anything but double ones, and then everything's +2 damage. And if you have something where it's like, man, if this hits like a regular caster and you have like one unit with POW 10 guns, it's probably going down. So that can be an auto winner if you're up against something that can be knocked down, if you have those shooting elements to be taking advantage of it. Or, you know, in a time right now where we're seeing a lot of medium infantry, that one-time shot knocking down a block of medium infantry, that can be almost like his feat all over again, where you're saying, all right, this turn I'll feat, and I'm going to lock you down. Okay, you didn't do too much. Next turn, bam, I knock you all down. Now, I guess you could forfeit your attack and walk towards me, but basically you're not doing anything again. So, it's up to you. A lot of times I spend the points just to get more punchy jacks because that's the way I play, but again, it's something to think of whenever you're building your Magnus list. Past that then, I think for all the tricks, it's really going to be more so around really stressing that scenario factor. The really big part about how you can be going in there and saying you can't move in. And I think a big mistake that a lot of Magnus 2 players make is that they want to cast this perfect feat that's going to instantly win them the game. And a big thing you have to keep in mind is that you don't need to do that. If you just cast your feat, lock up the opponent for a turn, get up on scenario, well remember, there's only 7 turns. And so if you get yourself into a spot where you're 3 control points ahead, that is an ace up your sleeve. And now you know that you can play out the game, and if the game goes stagnant all the way through, you kill some things, they kill some things, you score a control point, they can score a control point, you will win that game because at the end of the game, you are up 3 points. Even if they start getting ahead and they score an extra 1 or 2, you are up on control points, you're going to win that game. So you don't need to be thinking about winning right then. You can already be putting the pressure onto your opponent saying, all right, you're going to have to be more aggressive now or else I'm going to win this game. So that's more of the tricks and tips. Let's now talk about the ways to defeat Magnus 2. Now, the first thing you have to really think about all the time is that feat. I would say ignore everything else, and whenever you hear you're up against Magnus 2, only think about that feat. Now, the funny thing is that back in Mark II, Magnus 2 was seen as a bad caster, and he wasn't too much different from what you see him as right now. He had mobility rather than escort, he didn't have the whole unyielding thing, but for the most part, he's exactly the same as what he was right now, and everybody said, don't play Magnus 2, he's garbage. I loved him, but everyone, the normal thing to say is like, that's a garbage caster. And I think for the most part, the reason why they said that is because compared to some other control casters, he didn't have the same reach. He wasn't like a Denny with a 14-inch control range. He wasn't like a Haley 2 with like a 18-inch control range. It's only 12 inches. That's all it is. And I think that's a big thing you want to be focusing on, is realizing that when he feats, it's only going to be that 12-inch bubble. Now, a 12-inch bubble is not super small. It's going to be 24 inches plus a small base, and that's the affected area. But that being said, that can only control so much of the board. So whenever you want to be playing against Magnus2, you can't be thinking brick, you have to be thinking wide. You have to go wide so that Magnus2 can only be affecting so much of your army. If you're playing his favorite scenario where there's lots of scoring elements, know that Magnus2 can't control all those elements at the same time. Be setting yourself up so that whatever way Magnus2 goes to feat, you can go for the opposite side and go for that zone. Go wide and hold things back so that when Magnus2 feats, you are able to run something in to contest so that you're not seeing that big huge jump in control points. And the magic number is 20 because he is speed 5, he can charge 8 inches, it's going to go out another 12, there's your math, you now have 20 inches of possible threat. There's nothing else in there unless they have some weird like hunter's mark or something thrown in there too. There's nothing else that's going to be speeding him up, and so remember that and then use it against it. You know, you can always like be holding one beast back and being like, okay, you can come in and get the alpha, but then I'm going to be hitting you back. It's not going to be for free. But again, more importantly, having things outside that range saying that if you come up and if you feat, this infantry model is going to run into that zone, this one's going to be contesting that flag, you will not be going up at all. Sure, you might get a little bit of an alpha on the attrition side, but you will not be going up on the scenario side. And I think at the same time, you might want to be lying a trap for Magnus as well. When I used to be playing Magnus, well I still do, but when I used to be playing him in Mark II, the number one way that I always lost was to being shot down. I would charge in, I would pop my feet, I would lock things down, but even though you lock down models, you know what you don't lock down? Bullets. So they can just keep on shooting you, and Magnus2 can go down pretty easily. Now, that being said, I have seen an improvement in that in my own play style and in his own stats. You know, now that Escort gives him +2 armor, that makes him a little bit more buffy. In my own play, I go and I make an iron wall with my jacks to stop the same type of shooting that'd be killing him. So in Mark III, you know, in that era, I've been a better player and stopped that from happening. But again, you can lay that trap and say, okay, if you come into here, either I'm going to kill you or you're going to have to be playing more defensive to keep yourself alive. So you can try and do these kind of counter threats, counter traps, saying that if you go to this location, this is what I can do to you. Another great example for a more current meta would be when Chris Dancock said, okay, you can come in here and feed on me, but then this cockatrice that's outside of your range is going to come in and it's going to paralyze you, and I'm going to have you trapped there for the rest of the game. So know that if they have to come up to that spot, you know 8 inches forward, that's going to be your target spot for the things you're setting up in your list. As well, with these things going there, remember the way the feat works. The way the feat works is that models that are starting that activation in that zone, that's where they can't be moving whatever directions you say. There's a few tricks to get around this. If you use something like, say, Slipstream or Road to War, or something that moves models before their activations, well, that means you can move them outside of the bubble potentially and then charge them back in. I lost one game where that's what they did. They slipstreamed a Typhon, moved it back, and then charged it back in. It was like, wow, I just didn't even see that coming. But it was my opponent outthinking my feat. Another one would be push feats. Let's say like Cold Grima, where you're going to be pushing Magnus2 away. When I'm doing all my measurements, okay, you made a mistake. I can get that heavy, I can get that heavy, I can get that heavy. Haha, I charge in, I lock everything down. Cold Grima goes, pushes me back. Well, now they're not within my 12 inches, and now they can activate normally and do whatever they want. So really, really make sure you understand how that feat works, and then look to see if there's ways in your army to go against it. Maybe you have no guns, maybe you have no movement effects or anything like that, but if you do, try and use it so that you can actually be countering it. Another thing is that once you're feated on, don't give up. Another big thing that I see a lot that people do, be like, well, I'm stuck, pass the turn because I can't do anything. And that's really just giving me the game. What you need to do is say, what are my limitations? I can't go towards these two board edges. All right. What can I do to still protect my key pieces? Don't just leave your jacks there for me to get the alpha on. Don't just leave your caster there. Move them back. Move them in whatever directions you can and figure out what you need to do to still set up those defensive layers to keep your key pieces together. You know, if I'm getting an alpha and I'm killing your two best jacks, that's amazing. If you protect them and my alpha is only killing off a handful of infantry and then you can counterattack and start taking out my heavies, that's the big thing you need to do. That's what you need to think of and the way you need to try and be taking me back after the feat is done. So that's really, really important, and you have to just not give up and look for those opportunities. Now, I think that's really all the pieces of what Magnus does, what his tricks are, the things you should be doing when you're focusing against him, going wide, making sure that you're figuring out how far that feat goes, and then trying to use it actually against the Magnus2 player. But I think I want now to explain that really part of why Magnus2 only beats bad players. Now, I think the first thing to explain is just the fact that obviously that's not true. You can always have whatever dice that can happen. If you have extreme dice, you can have the worst player beats the best player. You know, obviously if you have two good players playing Magnus2, by definition, one of them has to win. But what I mean by that statement is that there is a huge disparity when it comes to playing Magnus2 against inexperienced players against experienced players. Because if you are playing against an inexperienced player with Magnus2, that can lead you to auto-win situations. Situations where you go in there, you feat, and you just win the game. Here's an example that I'm going to use, I've said before, but it's ingrained in my brain, and it's one of my biggest shames ever as a press ganger. I was playing a game. Magnus2 against Scorn. I had a friend that came in and they wanted to do lunch. They were from out of town. I want to spend time with them. I need this game to be over. And so the fastest way in my mind to make this happen is just to win. His Scorn force was not contesting any of the zones or any of the flags. I just moved up. I feeded on it because it had no guns, no movement shenanigans. It was literally stuck there. I scored. He couldn't do anything. I scored again on his turn, then on my turn I scored again, won the game, walked out. There was literally nothing the other player could do in that situation that they put themselves in. Again, had they been more experienced, they could have gone wide, they could have prepared for it, but because they were inexperienced in Magnus2, they walked right into the trap, got smacked in the face, game over. And the worst thing about this is that although in my head I thought that, okay, I can go for lunch, this will be over for them, they can find another game, what it actually led to was such a negative play experience that that player quit the game, and then the person I went to lunch with, who had never played War Machine before, said, wow, this game looks stupid. Why would anyone ever want to play this game? Now, luckily, eventually the person watching did actually start playing and gave it a chance and didn't see it isn't all just gotchas like that. But you can see what I mean, where if you're a new player and you position poorly once, you are locked down. There is no way you can change that. Once Magnus2 goes in and feats, sometimes there's just nothing you can do about it. With other feats, you know, okay, you have higher defense, you have higher armor, there's some skew in some direction, but different ways you can play and different ways you can roll the dice can always overcome it. Magnus2's feat is an absolute. You cannot come this direction or that direction. There's no, unless you roll a 6 or unless something else, if I catch you in this net, you are caught. And I find that's the biggest thing then. When people talk about pivots and sweepers when it comes to lists, this is a sweeper. This is something that's going to be catching opponents, and if they're not prepared for it because, you know, maybe they are an inexperienced player, or maybe they're a list that normally has to be playing as a block and they don't think to go wider, if they get caught by it, it is game over. See ya, sign the sheet, we are done. So Of course, you know, like I say, once people experience the Magnus2 and they start using it and saying, okay, I got to spread out, I got to do this, I got to do that, all the things we talked about, then they're going to stand a much better chance. They might still lose because even though they are more experienced, maybe the Magnus2 player is stronger, whatever. The big thing I want to focus here is that's that huge disparity of the one side where you have an inexperienced player to the other side where you do. You know, let's take another caster. Let's take Sloan. You know, Sloan still has kind of a gotcha feat. We're like, haha, I'm going to shoot you. But the thing is that even if you're an experienced player, you're still getting shot. There's no way, unless you just hide on the back of the board, that you're not being shot by Sloan's feat. You can stop yourself from just being assassinated, and you can try and control what pieces you lose, but still, no matter what, you're going to be taking that huge alpha. So the disparity from new player to experienced player for, say, like playing against Sloan, it's not as wide, it's more narrow. Whereas in Magnus2, a huge disparity. So what I'm hoping to do with this here is kind of twofold. Hopefully now all of you who have watched this will now know better what Magnus2 does and how to play against it. Maybe you are a person who is going to be playing Magnus2 and now this sets you up in ways of playing it. But the big thing I want to avoid, and one of those biggest shames I have, is that negative play experience, right? I really want to avoid. You know, it's one of those things where going into a game, when I'm up against somebody who's new now, I make sure they know. I say, have you played against Magnus2 before? If not, this is what his feat does. Make sure you understand this because I never want to have that negative play experience again. Is it something that Privateer Press should change? I don't think so. You know, again, he used to be seen as bad. You know, he hasn't really changed that much. If you look at the tournament scores, it's not like Magnus2 is crushing everyone. Yeah, it's not really there to something where it needs to be fixed in a competitive level. So that means when you have top players versus top players, I don't think it needs to be addressed. The real issue is when you're having new players play. And that's where you can have these major gotchas and this extremely negative play experience. And so really, as Magnus2 players, we have two options. We have either one, leave it as is and just accept it whenever Privateer Press eventually nerfs it down to like you can only feed on D3 plus 5 models or something like that, or we can try and make sure we take out that negative play experience element. Make sure that you're explaining to your opponents what it does. You know, if you're in a tournament situation and you're up against an inexperienced player, let's be honest, you're probably going to win that game anyway. However, at least it won't be a negative play experience. It won't be a thing where their entire army is locked down, maybe only a portion. So instead of being able to do almost nothing in that turn, at least they can play with their models over here. And they're not coming out of that game wanting to, you know, complain to Privateer Press. They're coming out of that game saying, oh, okay, yeah, that's what that feat did, just like my opponent told me. And, well, geez, these are the things I can do to counterplay it. Because if you get to do something, you at least have hope and ways that you're thinking of the future. If you're locked in situations where you couldn't do anything, you're basically just ready to give up. So there you go. There's Magnus2, my Orc Tactical team on it, everything about him, how to beat him, and why I think there's that huge disparity and what we need to do to fix it as a community, and hopefully you liked it. So if I missed anything, either as playing with or against Magnus2, please place it down below, and otherwise, we'll catch you later. Bye.